How different is your roster and particularly your starting lineup today as it was for the Michigan State game? And do you expect a lot of changes before the bowl game?
Yeah, it's really still kind of a moving target. A lot of conversations going on right now. Really has been since the last game at Michigan State, obviously. We'll see how that plays out. But as you see this across college football, this is going on. So we'll see how it goes. But there's still ongoing conversations.
Audrey Snyder, The Athletic, and then Donnie Collins.
Hey, James, good morning.
Hey, Audrey.
Is Anthony Poindexter going to be your DC for the bowl game? And regardless of who that person is, what's Manny's role going to be kind of during this period?
Yeah, so Anthony Poindexter will call the defense for the bowl game. And then Manny's really here, getting adjusted. Obviously, all the HR paperwork that has to be done at a place like Penn State. Getting him familiar with the roster, getting him familiar with the coaching staff, just getting adjusted, recruiting, all those types of things. So, that he's basically here, just kind of getting adjusted to Penn State. Wouldn't be fair to him, or the staff to jump right in. So obviously after the bowl game, we'll make that, that transition complete.
Donnie Collins, Scranton Times-Tribune, then Nate Bauer.
How you doing, James?
Hey, Donnie.
Hey, obviously, Brent was going to be a difficult guy to replace for you guys. What did you know about Manny that made him feel like the right fit to you? And was he one of those guys you kind of had on that list of potential people that to step in case that was ever needed?
Yeah, as you know, to your point, we keep an ongoing list of guys that are obviously, maybe fit different roles within our organization. And then, obviously the time that we have been able to kind of interact over the years, there was a lot of exchanging in ideas between the defensive staffs, really over a long period of time. And then when you really kind of, when you really start to get into this and you really start to do more, deep dives in terms of information, in terms of fit, in terms of scheme, so that you're not, starting all over with a completely different scheme and current players in your roster have some concerns and question marks there. And then obviously the recruits as well, so being able to go out and get the most experienced defensive coordinator that we can get. The head coach experience is a bonus, but the most experienced defensive coordinator, successful defensive coordinator that we could get that came from a similar scheme background. So, I was trying to be a little bit sensitive. Obviously, his last week was kind of crazy, as everybody followed on social media, and it was a whirlwind. So I was trying to be respectful of what he was going through, both personally and professionally, but also making sure that we talked enough that we could come to a point where both parties were comfortable with it moving forward. The other thing, as you guys know, is I work really hard to try to make sure that our players and our staff find out about it before anybody else. As we all know, that is really difficult to do nowadays. So trying to keep the circle as tight as possible, and that can create challenges as well. So combination of kind of all those factors. And then the other thing, Donnie, as you guys know, there was a bunch of, big time programs that were in need of defensive coordinators. And a lot of us were all, talking to the same people. So that factored into it as well.
Nate Bauer, Blue 8 Illustrated, and then Ben Jones.
Hey, James, how are you?
Good, Nate. How are you, man?
Good. Hey, there was a story in the Philadelphia Inquirer a couple of weeks ago interviewing Villanova's linebacker where he said that there were tells for Penn State's offense. I'm not sure if you saw the story or not, but he said that they knew whether plays were going to be runs or passes. And I guess I'm just curious whether or not you guys saw anything reflecting on the film this year that gave that kind of stuff away, and what your overall analysis was of the offense this season?
Yeah, there's always tells, right? That's what you do all week long. You study and trying to find them of your opponent, and then you're also doing them of yourself. A lot of times you can figure out defensively if they're running a line stunt based on the stance that they're in, which foot's up, which foot's back, those types of things. And obviously, I got friends on the Villanova staff. So what you try to do with opponents too that you have friends with is you reach out to afterwards and say, hey, do you guys have anything on us? We had some things on you guys as well, and be able to share those. But I did not see the article. But yeah, we go through those things. That's a big part of our weekly self-scout, as well as opponent scout, that you're trying to find tells and tendencies based on safeties, depth and width, or different type of stances. We had an indicator, in terms of one of our offensive linemen's stance, that we were able to get resolved after that game. But there always is something there in yours, and there's always something in your opponents, and you're trying to figure out what those things are and try to either eliminate them or complement them with a tendency breaker, because maybe it's something you can't eliminate. It's going to be there, but that you're going to have some other plays or other schemes that you're going to run out at a similar tendency to break it, so they're not as confident.
Ben Jones, StateCollege.com, then Rich Scarcella.
Hey, James, how's it going?
Good, Ben. How are you, man?
Good. In the last couple of weeks, you were able to hang on to a key assistant. You were able to beat out other programs in about 5 days for Manny Diaz. We aren't privy to a lot of the details that go on with your negotiations or other people's negotiations, but do you think 12 months ago that you guys would have had that mobility to do that?
You're talking about systematically at Penn State?
Yeah.
That's been probably, one of the things that we've been working on since I got here is how can we be, more streamlined? How can we move quickly? We're not really in a position where it's the weekend and people aren't working on the weekend or things like that. That could show up, whether it's bringing in a transfer student, whether it's hiring staff. In college football, there's really not a day of the week or a time of the day where you can say, we're not open for business. So I think we have improved in that area. I still think there's room for growth. And I think, Ben, to your point, when I talk about competing in every single area, 364 days a year, those are the type of things. I think that's a really good example. Being able to move quickly, being able to get a contract, in place that people are comfortable with. Obviously, there's always lawyers involved and those types of things. But I think that is one of many elements that I think we have improved on, but we still have room for growth there. And I think that's a really good example, Ben.
Rich Scarcella, Reading Eagle, then Mark Brennan.
James, can you hear me?
I got you now.
Okay.
Hey, Rich.
Hi, how are you?
Good. You?
Good. How would you evaluate Mike Yurcich after most of his first season as your coordinator?
Yeah, I haven't really at this point gone back and literally broke it all down and studied all the data. Obviously, we would have loved to put more points on the board and been more explosive and been more consistent. And that's really what we will spend a lot of time doing once the season has ended, is go back through everything: offense, defense, special teams, and really kind of map it all out. And where were we good? Where were we not good? What were the reasons for us not being good? In really all three phases. But as you can imagine, Rich, I think it's a really good question and it's a fair question. But as you can imagine, from the time we played our last game, we've been on the road recruiting. I think I did 17 home visits the last week out. And then on the same time, I'm trying to help Brent Pry in his situation at Virginia Tech. I'm also thinking about if I lose Brent Pry, what I'm going to do to resolve that. Obviously, I had some other coaches involved in head coaching, opportunities, and I was trying to help them and also think about if they left, how I was going to replace them. And then, what members of the staff, do I need to retain as well? And then dealing with the transfer portal, name, image, and likeness, and everything else that's out there. So to answer your question, Rich, that'll be something that we'll do a deep dive on. But, offense, defensively, and special teams, obviously, we would like to be number one in the country, number one in the Big Ten, whatever it is in every single category. And we're going to have to do a deep dive on all those things and say, okay, where weren't we good enough? Why were we not good enough in that area? What modifications can we make? And what needs to be resolved either through the recruiting process, through the transfer portal, or the old-fashioned development, which is a huge part of it as well. And that's development of the players, and that's development of the staff too.
Mark Brennan, Lions 247, then Corey Geiger.
Excuse me, James, on your signing day show, Manny mentioned that you guys are like-minded kind of in terms of defensive philosophy. Can you tell us where you guys are aligned and maybe give us some details on what you can share with us in terms of your discussions with him when talking about those things? Thank you.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, Mark, on that is, do we both base from a historical perspective and what we've done here and what he's done, do we both base out of a 4 down, in terms of base defense? Do we have the ability to go 3 down? Yes, but are we basing out of a 4 down? Are we basing out of a 4-2-5? Are we basing out of a 4-3? We've really done both in my 12 years as a head coach. We've been 4-2-5, really in my time at Vanderbilt, just based on the personnel that we had. And then obviously, based out of a 4-3 and what makes the most sense. In terms of on the back end, are you basing out of a quarter, half? Are you a man, middle of field closed man team? Are you trying to be disruptive and create, sacks and tackles for loss? Or are you playing more, let's eliminate the explosive play and keep everything in front of us, mindset. So it's really those things that I was aware of, and I think he was aware of based on, again, previous discussions and us studying them and them studying us, which was helpful. We have other kind of, crossovers in terms of he was at NC State the whole time I was at Maryland. He was also at Florida State when we were at Maryland. So there's kind of history there from the tree that he comes from. Again, maybe that was more of a 4 down, middle of the field closed defense that was, man coverage and overload your numbers in the box. But then I also think it's, how did he operate as a head coach, in terms of communication, in terms of structure, those types of things. Having Taylor on our staff, that he's worked for me and now worked for him, as a head coach as well, and how he ran things and how he structured things. Some guys come from a structure where they don't really ever meet. So did it make sense from that perspective? And then just kind of talking to each other, and, him asking me overall philosophy and defensive philosophy and vice versa. I think all those things, were helpful, through the entire discussion for both of us.
Corey Geiger, DK Pittsburgh Sports, then Dave Jones.
James, I want to ask you how much bowl games matter now. Historically, bowl games have been tremendously significant in college football, and especially to Penn State. Now you've got one New Year's Six game with 2 of the 6 Heisman top vote getters aren't going to play. other teams may not have. How do you convince the public that these games are still significant?
Yeah, I think, obviously that's a challenge right now. I think I did an interview the other day. I don't know whether you guys listened to it or not, but that was my argument is, we're talking about going to 8 playoff spots or 12 playoff spots. In my mind, you make it as big as possible, because once we expand the playoffs, in my opinion, we're going to continue to de-emphasize those other bowl games. So to me, if we're going to expand the playoffs, we should expand it as big as we possibly can to allow more teams the opportunity to play for the title, but also to be able to protect those bowl games by including them in that process as much as possible, because I think your point is a fair one. Every time I turn on my phone, there's somebody opting out from what we would all consider people that have been watching college football and loving college football for a long time, big time significant bowl games where players aren't playing in them. And this goes all the way back. I think it started to get maybe some national headlines. I think it was maybe when it was McCafferty opted out at Stanford. If that's the first one that jumps into my mind, if I'm right there. But there's obviously been others.
Dave Jones, Penn Live, then Mike Gross.
Hi, James. How you doing?
Good, Dave. How are you, buddy?
Good. Kind of piggybacking on what Corey said. I remember Paterno making some surprising personnel choices in bowl games like this that weren't like a top tier, very important bowl game 25 years ago. So considering what we're talking about here, do you consider this the end of this season or kind of the beginning of next season, personnel wise, and who you play?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. And obviously, I don't know the specifics of what you're talking about. Obviously, as coaches, there's things that we can share publicly and want to share publicly, and there's a lot of things that are going on behind the scenes that people aren't privy to. So I'm not sure about the specific decisions you're talking about, and really what were the reasons for those decisions, not just what was presented publicly. But yeah, I think it's a combination of both, right? It's the end of this season, and it's still an opportunity for us to go out and play the way we want to play, and it's still an opportunity for players to show on a national stage, what they're capable of doing, not only for Penn State but also for their futures. And then it's also some young players getting some opportunities, more significant opportunities. To give them some momentum going into the off season, but I think, as we changed, there's a lot of rules that are impacting all of this. A few years back, we changed a rule where agents could talk to players from the time they're freshmen. Now we've done the name, image, and likeness, and you got players being able to work with marketing companies for name, image, and likeness. And most of those marketing companies are tied to agents. And they're being, they're in their ear all year long. And they're, talking to the players, they're talking to the parents. So I know coaches, including us, are having discussions, with our players throughout the year that you normally wouldn't be having. So there's a lot of things that are factoring into this, all relevant questions, all good questions. But there's a lot of things that are factoring into this right now, and there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. I've had a lot of conversations. I actually was on the phone with a good friend of mine, David Shaw, last night. Called me. We were discussing some of these things. I'm actually going on to the board of the American Football Coaches Association. I was asked to join that by Todd Berry. So, going on to the board for that, so we can have some discussions about what we have to do for college football and really college athletics as a whole. There's some decisions that are going to have to be made. moving forward. So lot of factors go into all this.
Mike Gross, LMP Newspapers, then John Sauber.
Good morning, James.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good.
Kind of related to the last couple questions. When people are analyzing bowl games, they often talk about trying to figure out what a team's motivation might be in that game, and it seems like that is more in bowl games than in normal games. And I'm wondering if you could talk about your experience preparing teams to play. Is that a thing based on your experience preparing teams to play in a bowl game? And can you sort of, maybe it's too early, but can you take the temperature of your football team right now in this moment in that context?
Yeah, I think that's always been a factor, right? I remember when I was at Maryland, I actually was with Coach Witten, who's the head coach now of Driver, who we signed, Christian Driver. We were talking about this because I was at Maryland and he was at Tennessee at the time, and Tennessee was having a season where they thought they were going to play for a national championship and didn't. And at Maryland at the time, we were really excited about, getting into the Peach Bowl. It was a huge game. And I think we, ended up beating them 36-6 or something like that. So that's always been a factor of it. There's no doubt about it. So it's funny. I was also talking to Anthony Poindexter the other day and a bunch of other coaches, about, what bowl season used to be like. It was 2-a-days. I remember being at Maryland, with Ralph and playing in the BCS Orange Bowl. We made it to the playoffs and we did 2-a-days. We literally landed the plane and went right to the field. We didn't even go to the hotel. And I remember talking to Anthony Poindexter. They were doing 3-a-days. And then I talking to Terry Smith, and they were talking in the old days at Penn State, they would go for 2 weeks. They'd go a week somewhere and practice, and then do a week at the bowl site specifically to that game. And it was the same thing. It was 2-a-days for that first week, and then it would get to more bowl prep the second week. So, if you look at how bowls have changed over the last however many years, it's dramatic. I remember being at schools that didn't have an indoor facility, and you're practicing outside in the Northeast at 30 degrees weather, and how that was trying to get the guys motivated for that. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. There's no doubt about it. I think to the point that Dave had earlier, it's obviously the younger players that you have in your program that may be getting more significant experience than they've had, kind of where they're at with it compared to some older players. And then I think, as you go on social media and there's all types of information being sent out there about what's important and what's not. There's mixed messages across our society and a lot of different things right now. Some people call it rat poison, so we're trying to eliminate as much distraction as we possibly can, but also be realistic about what's going on and try to do everything we possibly can to put our players and our program in the best position to be successful, and also to make sure that they have the best experience they can have.
John Sauber, Center Daily Times, then Mike Crowley.
Good morning, James. How are you?
Good morning. You as well.
James, you talked a lot about Manny Diaz, like what is sort of the same about what he does schematically compared to what you want in the past. What does he do that separates himself, and what about that made that appealing to you?
Yeah, I think it's, if you look at the data, and obviously things have changed right now as being a head coach, but I think, some of the stuff that really jumped out, is the tackle for losses, and the turnovers. He's got some really good, data out there based on his time as a defensive coordinator. And then you look at the data, and then you also watch the film, and then you also talk to people, that you respect, that went against him, during those times as well. And not only did I get that before, but then also got that after. It was amazing how many people reached out to me about after the hire, about, you know, why they felt like it was a good hire and the details of it. So we did a lot of that homework ahead of time, but I think that, you know, the disruptive aspect of it, I think, has aligned with really who we've been in the past as well. Tackles for loss specifically, and then turnovers. And I think if I had to say one area that I think we can be better at defensively is turnovers. We've been pretty good in terms of sacks. You know, I'm talking about over the 8 years as a whole. We've been pretty good in terms of tackles for loss. I think we have gotten better in the turnover areas, but I think that's still, you know, if you're looking for low-hanging fruit in an area where you could, you know, really make a significant jump and the opportunities have been there, that's it. And it was interesting after the first couple practices he watched, the very first one, you know, he addressed the defense at the end of practice, not really specific to coaching or scheme, but just kind of how he saw it all. You know, and what his approach is going to be moving forward. And I thought that was, you know, interesting for me to listen to.
Mike Crowley, Meadville Tribune, and then Elton Hayes.
Hey, Coach, I'm working on an update on Journey Brown. I was hoping you could comment on his involvement with the team since his retirement, how he's adapted, and where you think we might see him 5 or 10 years down the road.
Yeah. You know, obviously Journey, you know, has got a, you know, an incredible story, you know, from, you know, recruiting him out of high school and then get to know his family and, to see what he's been able to do, you know, at Penn State. I was watching some highlights the other day of the Cotton Bowl when he played lights out, you know, and, you know, to think about what he's been able to do academically, the number of calls that I've gotten from influential Penn State people that want to help him, and really Journey and how he's handled this. You know, he's really handled some really tough news, you know, in a pretty impressive way, you know. So I think Journey's still trying to kind of figure out what his path is going to be, whether it's going to be, you know, in football, you know, whether it's going to be in, you know, some type of community aspect, whether it's running a community center and making an impact in kids' lives, you know, whether it's working on a college campus in a you know, football department, but maybe in football, in player development, you know, whether it's community service and things like that, you know, whether it's going into his own business. I think Journey's still trying to figure out what that next phase is. And he's been around, you know, our program. I'd like to see him every single day, but he's here more times than he's not. And, you know, trying to get him to make sure that he gets that Penn State degree, so as many avenues are open to him as possible. And, you know, he seems like he's trending in that direction. So I love Journey Brown as a person. Obviously loved him as a player, and I think he's got a very, very bright future, but we're still on that journey with him. And, you know, I see very bright things in his future for him.
We have time for 2 more questions. Elton Hayes from CNHI, Pennsylvania, and then Neil Rudell will wrap us up.
Hey, James, how are you this morning?
Good, Elton. Good morning.
Kind of going back to the bowl question, you know, you're taking a number of guys who are completing their second season here, but they're making their first bowl trip. You know, I spoke with Keandre Lambert-Smith earlier, and he was kind of talking about things that he was excited for about going down to Tampa and just a change of venue, change of pace. You know, what's the temperature like with those young guys who are going to be making this trip?
Yeah, you know, to be honest with you, as you know, Elton, I wish I had specific answers for you, but you know, again, since the season ended, we've been ripping and running, and then we had practice yesterday. We got practice today, and I think the practices have been really good. You know, I thought practice yesterday there was a real element of energy and enthusiasm at the end of practice, and guys flying around and having fun, and some guys that are getting a lot more reps right now than they got during the season. So there's some energy that comes from that. There's guys that their roles are going to be more significant in this game, based on some discussions that are still going on. I think Keandre is one of those guys, right, that we're all we're excited about when we were able to get Keandre to come to Penn State, and he's shown some flashes. And I know he's ready to take that next step, and we need him to take that next step. So I think he's a good example. But it's been overall, it's been really good. And then I think obviously having a guy like Sean come out and make a public statement, I think there'll be a few more of those coming out here soon, hopefully. But it's been good. I think today's practice will be good because today's really the first practice where we're really transitioning into Arkansas. The other games were more like, the other practices were more like spring ball type practices that had some Arkansas introduction elements in them. But today is truly a Arkansas practice. We will have another Arkansas practice on Sunday. We don't practice on Saturday because we leave that day open for the guys that are graduating. And then it's pretty cool. Vangelo Bentley, one of our graduate assistants, is graduating with his master's degrees. I'm super proud of him, which is also important. And then obviously, guys will get a little bit of time off after they finish up their exams and get some time with their families for Christmas, which is nice. And then we'll travel Christmas evening. We'll travel Christmas evening to the bowl site. So, so far so good, Elton. But today I think will be a true tell because it's more specific to our opponent.
And Neil Rudell, Tuna Mirror.
Sometimes we have these long pauses. I don't know if it's us or if it's Neil.
Neil, is your mic working?
Yeah. How about
there
now?
we go.
Yeah.
There you are, Neil. How you doing?
Hey, James.
How you
You mentioned moving
How you doing,
parts.
Neil?
Good, James. How are you?
Good. Maybe you said that while your mic was off, but I didn't hear any of that. So I just make sure I get you.
Merry Christmas.
You as well. Hey, Neil, I like that. You're more usually like a Scrooge type of guy. So I appreciate it.
Ebenezer. Yeah, that was my. Hey, you mentioned moving parts. Can you at least address?
I would
Jahan
say what you said. I didn't hear the beginning.
You mentioned moving parts. Can you at least address whether Jahan status has been resolved, or are you leaving that confirmation to him?
Yeah. Again, this is an example where you guys are going to ask me questions, and I get it. That's your job. That's part of it. But as you know, over 8 years, I'm not going to disclose a player's situation, whether it's injury, whether it's NFL, whatever it may be. Whether it's Sean Clifford, announcing that he's coming back. I'm not going to make those announcements. We're gonna work with the student athletes and guys that are announcing they're coming back, or are entering the NFL draft or whatever it may be. For 8 years, I've left that up to the student athletes, and that process isn't going to change.